Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. There's been a lot of talk about the asylum seekers and the immigration process that's going on within the community, and I thought it'd be really important that we address what's going on, and we talked about what's going on, and a lot of the things that the city is doing today, and what we're facing with. One of the things that we know is the immigration process is broken, and this is a broken process that we have to work with. This is what we've been working with for the last 3 years, but it's continues. You know, there's been no relief. So, and one of the things I said, that the federal government is funding the asylum seekers. The federal government is funding all the programs that are going on, and that's one of the biggest questions that's being asked today by a lot of the constituents. We've had a lot of calls from the media. We've had a lot of calls from constituents wanting to know if the El Paso taxpayers are funding it. And so we felt it was important that we get out in front of it and talk about it, and we are funding it through the federal government. The federal government has given us money, and we've one of the things that we felt was really important was that we figured out how to be frugal with the money that the government gave us. And if we went out and subcontracted and contracted everything out, it would have cost us a lot of money, and we probably would have run out of money. So we had to figure out, because we don't know when we're going to be able to get more money. We don't know what the federal government budget will be. So it's important that we have money to be prepared for the unknown. One of the things that we were able to do is, and we did this last year, and it's part of our budget this year, we have hired 100 city employees that work for whether the zoo, whether they work for different areas within the city, and they're part of our budget. And once they're needed, we take them out of our budget and put them into shelters. And I'm going to have the chief kind of talk about how we've been distributing those and helping them so they can open different areas. But so then the federal government will reimburse the city at their current rate, whatever the rate would be. So that's when the city's not paying for them. So it's important because, again, it's what we see, that if we don't do that, it's almost impossible. You ramp up with contracts, and you have to leave them there. So when you leave the contract there, then you continue to pay even though you don't have the need for it. So we've been able to bring them over, have the federal government reimburse the city, and continue to make sure that we do the best job possible. We do have, currently we have funding available. In the last tranche of money that the federal government gave out, which was, if I'm not mistaken, was $75 million that distributed. The city did not receive any because of the savings that we've been able to do. But again, we still have money to be able to operate. But the numbers have continued to grow. The numbers, you know, last year this was when the numbers went up, and we see the numbers growing again today. And yesterday we did have 1,700 people that came across, or the day before yesterday, but we get the numbers in the morning. So those numbers continue to grow. Last night, Chief, I think we were able to house about 1,100.
Last night was just over 700 is what it turned out to be. Okay. Yes, sir.
So we've been prepared. They keep calling us and said, we're going to have 400 street releases. We're going to have 300 street releases. And we say, no, we don't. We're not going to have street releases. We can't, you know, our biggest number one priority is the safety of our community and the safety of our asylum seekers also, so because we don't want them out on the streets, we don't want them sleeping in the streets, but at some point we will run out of capacity. And we do have 400 rooms that are allocated for that, but at some point we will run out of capacity, and we'll have to activate that emergency sheltering emergency that it is in place, but we're not using it at this point. So it's been, we're looking at it that the numbers continue to grow. I think today Chief Rodriguez told me that they told us that we need to figure out what we need to do, because they plan on having 700 street releases unless we come up with a plan during the day. And we meet every day. This has become something that we meet every day to prevent that from happening. Chief told me that on Tuesday in San Diego they had 1,100 street releases. So, and I know Arizona, the numbers are starting to grow. So we see it growing all around the country. And the city of El Paso, we've been very proactive in being prepared again for the unknown numbers. So I think the chief I'd like for him to kind of go over how we use the 100 team members from the city and how we're able to allocate them to prevent street releases today and how we use the 400 rooms that we do have allocated through 4 different hotels around the city. Chief?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, everyone, for coming out today. He talked about the personnel that we have, that they work around several departments. And so we took on that concept back when we had COVID. And we were very specific. When we first started with COVID, we hired COVID testers. And then when you get the vaccine out, you needed somebody to vaccinators. And so we learned to spec their job spec, which gives them a range that falls under that emergency umbrella. And so we did the same thing with our migrant operations, is we've hired staff, and their umbrella covers several different items. And so we have staff that help out. Sometimes they're out in the food bank. They're embedded with certain NGOs, some of the NGOs that need staffing assistance, so that they can keep their capacity up. And so those are employees that are hired full time. Now, we know the migration peaks, drops, and so by having them in this job spec, we can take them when there's no need for them in the migrant operations. We can take them and let them work in vacancies we have throughout the city. So at that point in time, they're stopped being funded by FEMA. They go onto the city dollars, and they're filling vacancies within parks, libraries, and so forth. And so that we've been very successful in that. We currently have over 50 people in the field right now. That's just those people. They're out in the field, whether they're embedded in NGOs, running our shelter operations, part of our roving teams that's going around the downtown area, the airport. It's just a constant daily routine. We talk about the airport operations. Well, it does take staffing. Airports are very, not airports, hotels are easy to use because they're developed for people to stay overnight. They have that separation. They give that separation, that privacy, some dignity for those who are staying in our care for those short period of time before they move on their way. But that's where they're being utilized today. We've, just in the last couple of days, we've housed over 1,300 migrants in the hotels. We've been doing, since August 12th, we've been averaging about 100 migrants a night, and that's just to assist the county. And so that they can increase and keep working their migrant processing center, they can't get them all transported out by the end of the day. They have no shelter capabilities, so we're actually bringing 100 into the hotel on average nightly, and so we've been doing that for well over a month now. Another thing we're utilizing Sun Metro buses. And so we are actually picking up the migrants from CBP, and we're taking them either to our hotel operations or to the county MSC, their processing center, so that it can be more timely. That's a huge, when CBP is working with such a large number of encounters, they are processing, they're doing their job on their border, they're processing behind the scenes, they're housing those that they have in their custody. And so there's a lot of operations, so transportation gets delayed throughout the day. So to be more efficient with everybody's time and money, we are actually doing the transportation so that we can get them to the MSC early in the morning. We can get them into our hotels in a timely fashion, and we're also doing processing on that backside. For those that didn't have a chance to go to the MSC that day, we'll try and make arrangements for them, and then we'll regroup those in the morning that don't have any arrangements. We'll get them over to the county as we start doing all of our other transports.
Thank you. And that thing that's been really important, we talk to Chief Good from the Border Patrol on a daily basis to find out what's going on, and we've asked them to make a commitment to us as a city that they would not do any street releases without talking to us first and giving us that opportunity to make sure that we find some type of sheltering. And like I said, it's getting more difficult day in and day out because, you know, if we have 400 rooms committed, but if we're not using them, those hotels do use the rooms, and then when we go to get them, they may not be available that day, and they may not be available for a few days. So those are challenges that we're working for on a daily basis. The numbers that continue to increase is we'll continue to make sure that, you know, when we talked about decompressing the system, those areas are saturated also. Those areas already can't take any more. And that creates a challenge for us on how we're going to continue to work through this. So I think that Chief Rodriguez, who's running the Office of Emergency Management, they're doing a really good job of making sure that, when we're talking about the roving teams and we're talking about every day we're cleaning the streets to make sure that we got sanitation department going out and cleaning it and making sure the streets are clean. So we're continuing to be proactive. This is, this is a daily operation that we're operating, and every day we seem to need to add a little something to continue to make sure that we get it done. So, Chief, you got anything to add?
Not much, Mayor. Thank you. No, I think we covered it all, but that's effectively, we're just applying the same strategies that we have previously, and we just scale those accordingly, depending on what the need is.
If I could add, we are seeing people in the downtown area, and we're seeing them coming out later in the evening. And if you're looking at that, it's not that they're being street released. Those are the CBP1 apps that actually they're processing. It's part of the process. They come over to the PDN bridge, they have their appointment, they get processed, and they're released from right there. And so they're moving her up. That's another thing that our roving teams are assisting with, is connecting them with shelter for the night or transportation to the airport if they're making their own means and moving on. So that's another function that we are doing.
Yeah, and 2 nights ago, I drove through downtown, and I happened to see quite a few of those walking around, and I called the chief and woke him up and said, Chief, I need to make sure that we look and see what's going on. And they did come out, and the roving teams came out and assisted everyone, whether single adults or families, who went on to make sure that we gave them an opportunity to get them off the streets and help them get to their next destination. So, and with that, we'll open up the floor to any questions you all may have.
Thank you. You mentioned the number one priority, trying to have no street releases, but even without street releases, we're seeing a lot of migrants sleeping on the streets because they time out of shelters, and the NGOs who run these shelters are saying what we need is more shelters, we need more volunteers. Are you considering opening up a school or the convention center to help with the sheltering process of it? The county has also mentioned that that was going to be your quote-unquote lane.
One of the things, and the chief will elaborate on it a little bit, is that those are, a lot of those are in shelters somewhere, and then they come out and they want to be out on the street because they do want to do daytime work, and they're being picked up, and they come in early, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Shelters, or the shelters are no longer accepting them.
Okay, that's when we have the roving teams, and that's when we continue to, pick them up. And you're right, and then that's what we're talking about, exactly what you're saying. The capacities are starting to fill, and one of the things we got a call was 11:30 at night about 3 weeks ago on a Friday, and said there's 36, might have been total asylum seekers out on the street, and there was nowhere. What can we do with them? So we went in, put them in a hotel that night, and then the next morning we went with a rescue mission, and we those team members, remember we have those 100, then we went ahead and helped them be able to open their facility across the street. So we put them where we could help them operate and be able to open the shelter across the street from them. Remember, when you talk about the rescue mission and you talk about the Opportunity Center, those are for the homeless, and they've been contracted to kind of share the facility. And so if the homeless population becomes greater, then they have less numbers to be able to put in there. So those are the things that we're working through. And you're right, that's why we have roving teams. That's why we're out there day in and day out, and we'll continue to do that. And but street releases is when the Border Patrol says, I got 400, we're going to release them to the street unless you guys can pick them up and help us get them to their next destination, help us go through that. So we see that, and that's why we have roving teams. No ifs and buts about that. Chief?
Would it be more proactive to have a shelter already ready, so that, because since we know these numbers are happening, since we know that the current shelters are overcrowding and taking in dozens more people than they have capacity for, since we know that people are sleeping on the streets, since we know that Rescue Mission and others already have people camping out on their grounds, that they already have to turn people away, why not already set up a shelter?
So we do shelter through the hotel system, as I talked about. And so looking at those timeouts, specifically to your original question was on timeouts, we're working with the NGOs, the county's processing center, and we're actually picking up those timeouts, bringing them into shelter and rotating them back through the MSC. So that way they get through that several points in time so we can help them connect with their travels to move on. A lot of people are choosing to stay outside. You have a lot of mothers and children staying within the church downtown, and their spouses or their fathers, the husbands don't want to leave their families, so they're staying right there, and they're choosing to stay outside regardless of the offer for sheltering. So that's a nightly thing, but we do go out there and we ask them if they'd like sheltering. Then there's another large population who don't want to go into a shelter because they don't want to be relocated out of the downtown area because they're looking for that day work. They're looking to make some money so they can connect with their travels.
Mayor, I spoke with you last month in August, and you had mentioned that the city has been in talks with EPASD about a vacant building. Where does that process stand? Is there any update to that?
Well, we're currently still in the process of getting the approval from EPISD to sell us the facility. We did have some community meetings to make sure the community, had an input and give us some of the input of what we need to do for transparency. We met with the surrounding areas and talked to them. So we're in the process of course, the sooner the better for us, because just as Ms. Ramirez just pointed out, we have to have facilities prepared and ready to go. And that's what we're trying to do with the facility that we're trying to purchase. That is our objective, is to be prepared and ready, and that's why we want to buy the facility from EPISD. So that kind of answered, your question, also Ms. Ramirez's question.
At the beginning of the press conference, you said that you guys had one shelter option that you guys haven't explored or opened at this moment, correct? Days have on standby, is that what I understood?
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay,
that's it.
well, my question is, when you have, the downtown network shelters of Rescue Mission, Sacred Heart Church, and the Opportunity Center, they're saying, with 400 to maybe 500 extra beds, that could help. What are the options from the city to provide, a more permanent sheltering option so that street releases isn't, a reality here again?
We provided over 700 beds last night. So yes, so that's what we're doing. That is the operation. You see San Diego has street releases. You see other areas of the country having street releases. We don't. That's what we've been proactively working on. That's the communications the mayor has on a daily basis with CBP. We're all in communications. We're talking to everybody, and it's to prevent those street releases. And that's where we just stand up and we open up as we need it. If we lose capacity within hotels, then of course the next thing is looking at that congregate sheltering. I believe the mayor started off today talking about how we still have an emergency declaration in place, and that's what we need to do, emergency sheltering. So we left it there because we know we might have to transition into that. Long-term goal, we'd like to buy the facility. We'd like to prep it for a long-time housing facility so we don't have to declare emergencies. We can have it set up, ready to go all the time. And so that is the goal of the city.
Yeah, we had a conversation yesterday, and this is an ongoing planning. We had a conversation of how long would it take us to set up the convention center? How fast would it take us to set up different facilities if needed? So we are prepared. We are looking at, as the numbers increase, how long will it take us to continue to make sure that we don't have street releases? And that's, today, like I said, they called us this morning and said we're going to have 700. If you guys, what can you do to help us? So that's something that we'll be working on during the day to try to prevent.
Mayor, if you could provide a comment in Spanish. En español.
Yeah, we'll go through it and then we'll come back and do that for them.
Can you expand a little bit more on the hotel, on the purchase of Moorhead School? How will the city pay for that? And will it serve, as you said at a recent city council meeting, as both an animal services shelter and a migrant shelter?
Thank you for that question, because I think that's important. That's been asked quite a bit. So the facility is 9.04 acres, which is a huge facility. And what we want to do is two separate operations, not, so the animal services would be completely on a separate area, which would be a full-time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day operation for animal services. And that's something that is well needed within the city, where we have so many animals that are strays that are out there. So that would be a total separate operation from the asylum seekers or the different sheltering operation that we're going to be doing. And the part that we'd be purchasing for asylum seekers or emergency sheltering, it would be through federal funding. That would not be, again, through local taxpayers. Now, the animal services, we've set up in the budget to be able to purchase and open up an additional animal services facility. So it wouldn't increase taxes because it's already been put into our budget moving forward so we can do that. And we were able to do that and still roll back taxes. We were able to do that and still have 2 police academies, 1 fire academy, buy police cars, buy fire trucks, and be able to do a full maintenance program for our facilities and be prepared to hopefully be able to buy a West Side facility for animal services.
My question is for Chief D'Agostino. At what point will you guys look at opening up that emergency shelter? Is there like a specific number you guys are looking at, or what is the threshold to looking at opening that up?
Threshold is the availability of hotels. So that's how we're doing. We're doing it on a daily basis as we were inventorying what we have available in the city. We're taking those up, we're operating those. It's a more ideal location to keep migrants in a hotel than a congregate shelter. You all did a tour of our shelters when we stood them up, whether it was the school or the convention center. You got a lot of cots, you got a lot of open space. There's really not a lot of privacy. And so that's what we're trying to keep as much as we can.
I had a follow-up on the school's purchase. You mentioned that you'd be using federal funds for that. Is that to actually purchase a school or just to retrofit it for the migrant?
There's 2 different funds we can use. One would be the ARPA funding, and the other one to retrofit the school would be through FEMA.
Yes.
And we've talked with the secretary, we've talked to FEMA, and we've actually met with different officials from the White House to make sure that we are on track to be able to do those things. So ARPA funding would be to purchase the portion for emergency sheltering, and then the refurbishing of it would be able to be done through FEMA funding.
Why that school specifically over other properties?
Well, there's about probably 20 schools that are available, and the school district has had them for sale for years and years, and they've not had any luck selling them, unfortunately. Through their presentation, they showed that they were able to sell some custodial facilities for about $600,000, but you know, this really fits the needs for animal services on the west side, and that's one of the things we wanted to look at. How do we maximize our ability to be able to do emergency sheltering and also have animal services on the west side, which is a huge problem for us right now, that we have strays and animals on the street. So we really looked at it, but how could we make sure that we serve the community properly and in the best way, and that was the thing to do. I think you two can just alternate questions.
Mayor, you know, Mr. Abbott was here in town. Do you guys have any talks about the situation in the board? I know he was here for a different event, but behind closed doors, were you able to speak with him about the situation here at the border?
What was that?
Did you have any discussions with the governor on migration?
No, that's not what his visit here yesterday was not about the border or the asylum seekers or anything. The visit yesterday was a huge investment by Schneider Electric to El Paso to open up their 4th facility and create an additional 400 jobs and make El Paso the largest manufacturing facility for them in the United States. And it was a huge deal for the city, and that's what he was here for. And he was here, came in and did the ribbon cutting and left because he had other commitments that he had to go to. And then you're next, Donna.
I wanted some clarification on some of the numbers that you said earlier. You mentioned, or one of you mentioned, 700 possible street releases. Is that today or was that yesterday?
No, today. They called us this morning and said, we need help from you today. Yesterday was 400. The day before was 300. And we were able to make sure that didn't happen. And then today, in the morning, we got, okay, we're going to have 400. And then how much later? Maybe a little later, they came back and said, oh, we got 300 more we need help with.
About 10 minutes.
So now we're up to 700 today that we have to work with to do that.
Do you have the current hotel capacity for that, or are you having to try to find another hotel or move the people out of there? Do the people have a limit in the time that they're
So
allowed
as
to
I
stay
talked
there?
about that, we do move them out. We get them over for processing, so we'll get them over to the county's processing center. We'll do those movements. It's that daily check with the hotel operations themselves to see what their availability is. We are using several hotels at this point in time already, so we do have our crews focusing on those facilities.
And I think it's important that when they less than 1% stay in El Paso, and that's important. And they're not, when they come here, they're not coming to El Paso. They're coming to the United States, and that's where the chief is talking about helping them get to their next destination, getting them with their sponsors. And again, and this is not costing the El Paso taxpayers. This is funded through the federal government, but I would say right now it's about 1%, a little less than 1% of the people are staying here, Chief.
That's correct. That's our,
Yeah, so
we're
that's
being
why,
told.
and so this is not permanent sheltering, and so they stay between 1 to 3 days, and that's important for us.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go ahead and close it out and allow for any Spanish or last-minute comments.
Yeah, I don't know if in Spanish they have a particular question that we need to address, or I can just do a overview.
An overview, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And, first of all, I want to thank you, Ms. Ramirez. I know that, because I think it's important, because we've had a lot of conversation and we've had a lot of calls from the community concerning that it's part of the taxpayers, local taxpayers, and it's important that we allow them to see that we're working to make sure that it's not part of the local taxpayers. FEMA's funding it, but we're being very frugal with the money and not needing additional money, every month or whatever, because the money they've given us, we've been able to make sure that we prepare ourselves for what's going to be coming up again. And like stuff, $75 million that was just allocated a few weeks ago, they didn't give us any for the city, because again, we've been able to make sure that we're able to ramp up and then ramp down and not be spending money. And with that, I'll go to Spanish, so thank you. Lo que estamos ahorita hablando es de que tenemos los números ahorita que están viendo ahorita están creciendo. Y ayer el número era 1,700 que entraron aquí al Paso, y estamos trabajando con el CBP para estar seguro que nadie está en la calle. Y nos hablan todos los días y nos dicen que necesitan ayuda porque hace dos días iban a poner 300 personas en la calle y les ayudamos para no ponerlos en la calle. Ayer nos hablaron, nos dijeron que iban a tener 400, les ayudamos otra vez para no tenerlos, y todavía no ha tenido nadie que está en la calle porque tenemos 400 cuartos en hoteles que estamos usando. Anoche usamos 700 camas para estar posible que no tener nadie en la calle. Ahora nos hablaron en la mañana que van a necesitar 700 personas ayuda para que no salen en la calle, y es lo que estamos ahorita trabajando en eso. La cosa que está muy importante, lo que estamos haciendo ahorita, es que no está pagando los taxpayers aquí de la ciudad del Paso. Eso es el dinero del gobierno federal y estamos ayudándoles. Y ahorita estamos viendo que en San Diego el martes salieron 1,100 personas en las calles, el día siguiente salieron más. En Arizona está pasando lo mismo. Aquí estamos trabajando muy fuerte para eso que no nos pasa a nosotros. Cada día trabajamos juntos, tenemos juntas para ver qué podemos hacer, pero los números están creciendo muchos y es algo que es muy importante para hablar con la comunidad y decirles lo que está pasando ahorita. La cosa que ahorita estamos viendo que es algo que estamos listos y tenemos que abrir el Convention Center, otras partes. Estamos viendo como de comprar una escuela para estar preparado, porque no sabemos lo que va a pasar anoche. Hablo con el CBP, le digo, puedes ver allí a ver cuántos vienen para mañana, y me dice, sabes que no vemos hasta que cambie el día, y eso es la cosa importante. Entonces estamos seguros. El gobierno federal dio $75 millones para este programa al Paso. A nosotros no nos dieron nada por la cosa que estamos usando el dinero bien. Tenemos 100 personas que trabajan por la ciudad y están en diferentes departamentos de la ciudad, pero cuando se necesita entran para ayudarnos a eso, y el gobierno federal nos regresa el dinero a la ciudad para esas personas que entran trabajando en esa parte. Pero eso es muy difícil, porque si contactamos a alguien para hacer ese tipo de trabajo, se quedan arriba y no pueden bajar, y entonces gastan todo el dinero, y eso es una cosa importante. El county y la ciudad del Paso son dos el budget de nosotros es diferente de ellos y hacemos cosas diferentes para la migración de ayudar a los que están viniendo a buscar ayuda aquí en los Estados Unidos.
Gracias a todos. Thank you all.
Hey, Ms. Ramirez, I guess you understood. I saw you taking notes on that.